Welcome to our brief introduction to rhetoric. This should be mostly review for my 11th grade students, but I wanted to take the time to actually ensure that you understood and were able to identify and use these elements within writing. So rhetoric, anytime we call something rhetoric or we talk about rhetorical things like rhetorical appeals, we're talking about things that are intentional. So it's the art of intentionally using language to persuade, inform, or express your ideas, and we're using it to achieve a specific goal. So one of the strategies we have in rhetoric is going to be repetition. So repetition as a strategy is using repeated words, phrases, or ideas. And we do this to either emphasize a point, to build rhythm, so it sounds good, especially in things like speeches, and to make a message more memorable and impactful. So the more often we say it, the more likely you are to remember it. So we use repetition, once again, coming back to that intentional and artful strategy to do this: emphasis, rhythm, memory. So here are some structures that we use. So they are typically forms of parallel structure. So parallel structure is when the sentence is using a repeated format to create a sense of symmetry or connection between either clauses or lines of writing. So we have a few different options. We're just going to go over two here. So repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences, which I know sounds like, um, you know, another language to a lot of you, but really you're just looking at the beginning of a sentence will often be repeated in multiple sentences or in multiple clauses. And so when we're talking about clauses, we're talking about like sections of sentences. Um, so we have the example, and this is the most famous example, and that is Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. So I have a dream that my four children will. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, I have a dream today. So once again, that emphasis, that emotion, that memorable line comes from that anaphora, from that intentional repetitive structure. We also see this in epistrophe, but it's on the reverse end. So if anaphora is at the beginning of a sentence or clause, then epistrophe is going to be at the end of a sentence or clause. So we see Emerson's here. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny compared to what lies within us. Epistrophe and anaphora are often found inside really memorable or like sing-songy type of quotes that people repeat often. Emerson's quote here, what lies behind us, it's that behind us, before us, and within us, that's the repeated structure of the epistrophe. It also does have anaphora, so we still see what lies behind, what lies before, and what lies within as the anaphora. So you can use both within a sentence as well. It's just a little bit less common. All right, so we can also see repetition of ideas, set off two ideas in a balanced parallel opposition. So one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So just that two opposing ideas coming, and we're repeating that structure in both of them, and it makes it sound more memorable, more meaningful, and really it makes them sound more intelligent than maybe they actually were when they were first, the person behind them wrote them was. So yeah, so repetition of ideas, repetitions of words and phrases either at the beginning of sentences or at the end of sentences. All of these forms of repetition increase that sing-song quality, increase that memorability, increase the emphasis on the ideas being shared. All right, so something that's not necessarily a strategy as much as it is a thing to note when we're talking about argumentation is a logical fallacy. So a fallacy is an error of reasoning. These are flawed statements that often sound true. Logical fallacies are often used to strengthen an argument, but if the reader detects them, the argument can backfire and damage the writer's credibility. And I do want to point out here that when we're talking about that type of argumentation where logical fallacies exist, that's going to be more in persuasion. So we want to avoid purposefully using logical fallacy in argumentation and really kind of only use it in persuasive speeches where you are trying to win over an audience versus argue the validity of a point. But yes, these are flawed statements. They often sound true. If you've ever gotten in a fight with a significant other or a family member, you are actually used and heard a slew of logical fallacies. So just to kind of give you the background on the word fallacy derives from the Latin fallere, meaning to deceive, to trip, to lead into error, or to trick. If we look at the Greek word phellos, that means deceitful. So it is meant to be this like trickery that is used once again more often in persuasion, where we're really trying to win. We're not necessarily trying to be as fair and well reasoned as possible, like we see in argumentation. All right, so why study logical fallacies? It is important to develop logical fallacy detection skills in your own writing as well as others. We want to be as clear as possible and avoid these types of mistakes. But it helps us to defend against logical errors when we understand what they are and how to avoid them. So here's two examples. There's a ton of logical fallacies, and I could take a week, 2 weeks to teach you them. But I think it's more important that you understand that your logic needs to be clear and well reasoned with connecting ideas than it is to spend a ton of time on logical fallacies just for our class and our purposes. So an ad hominem is when you attack the character or the personality traits of the person making the argument rather than addressing the argument itself. So this is like when your mother tells you to go clean your room and you're like, well, who are you to tell me to clean my room? You're not, you never clean anything ever, something like that. And it's kind of an unrelated thing. If that person is a good person, bad person, good at cleaning, bad at cleaning, doesn't really have to do with their statement that you should be cleaning your own room. So the defense would normally need to defend against the position that was just taken. So your mother tells you that you need to clean your room. Your argument might be more well reasoned if you said that the state of the entire house was also disheveled and the whole house needed to be cleaned, which wouldn't really serve you in that instance. But maybe that you had other reasons why you needed to defer the action until later. So here's another example. Of course, you don't believe the proposal for the new park is a good idea. You're not a real member of this community, and you don't belong here. You don't, you're not a real anything. Those are all kind of irrelevant to the idea of thinking the park is a good idea or a bad idea. Now, straw man is when we misrepresent or exaggerate an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. So we should increase funding for public schools. So you want to bankrupt the city by giving away all our money to schools. If we look at person one statement, this is not at all what they were saying, but by misrepresenting their idea, person two can easily argue and break that down. It's a lot easier to argue against the straw man than it is the general initial argument that was there. So yeah, these are just two examples. You want to practice them and identify them. And if you really enjoy them, you can learn tons more to find in your arguments with your family and friends. All right, so let's move into the rhetorical appeals, which are what you've probably spent the past few years learning. So we have logos, which is if this is true, then so is this. This makes sense because giving well-reasoned arguments. This is just like this other thing you know to be true. So here's a factual statement you already understand and the logic to connect these two ideas. Here's a proven fact. Here's the math on this. This is all your statistics, your quoted material from experts, anything that supports the logic of the argument, so our well-reasoned argument. And should be the strongest basis in any argument that we produce. Facts, the numbers, the actual science-based information. So that is logos. That is appeal number one. Appeal number two, pathos. Used mostly in persuasion, not in argumentation. So when I'm teaching my students, I was teaching them all of them, and then I was seeing a lot of pathos in their argument. And I just want to clarify that when we are trying to persuade, to convince, that is a different purpose of our writing. So we always come back to task, purpose, and audience. Task, what are we supposed to be doing? The purpose, why are we doing it? Audience, who are we trying to do this with? And pathos is going to be when we are trying to convince somebody that we are correct. Whereas argumentation is more logical and balanced and fair and is more about saying that your stance or your position has validity in the space of argumentation in that field. So pathos is mostly in persuasion, not argumentation. It can work well on parents when you're trying to have them let you go out late at night, but it's that emotional appeal, so playing on their heartstrings. Uh, Emotion, if you think of the word pathetic, that's how I always remember pathos, because we think of ethos as emotion just because of the E, and that's silly. It is the pathos root that connects us back to pathetic, and that is, that shared root is that emotional word. And it's the emotion the audience experiences. So, how do we use the audience's emotions against them? A lot of times, and these are mostly negative, it's going to be like fear or danger. So we respond really well to fear and danger. So saying if you do this, then bad things will happen. If you don't do this, bad things will happen is a really strong motivator for many people. We also see this in like dog commercials with like Black and White and Sarah McLachlan singing, and she's making us really sad about the state of, dogs and shelters. Those types of things are pathos. It's playing on our heartstrings and our sympathy for these things. So logos is logic, pathos is our emotion, which leads us to ethos. So ethos is credibility and character of the speaker. You'll hear this connected to ethics a lot, which I think is a good like reminder that it connects to ethics, because it can be about, am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing? So what's right and what's wrong within like the moral landscape or ethical landscape. But it really kind of comes back to credibility. So if we think about ethos as credibility, you're almost always going to be better at either identifying or creating it within your work. So this is when we kind of establish reasons for people to trust us as speakers and writers. This is why it's true. This is why you should trust me. It can also be implied. So if you are giving a speech, did you come from a place of respect? Did you respect the audience and yourself by how you dressed, by how much you prepared, all of those things? When a police officer shows up in uniform, they're going to have ethos that wouldn't be there if they were an officer and not in uniform. And so that is part of why we dressed in uniform for things like this. So ethos is our third one here. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and keep going. All right, so I made a quick reference slide. We've got logos. How does the writer appeal to my logical reasoning, facts, data, examples, reasoning? Ethos, how does the writer establish my trust in them, credibility, good person, trustworthy? And pathos, how does the writer stir my emotions, anger, sadness, pity, frustration, and sympathy? Those are all going to be ways that we involve their emotion. The last one here, I chose not to go over it today. It's Kairos. Kairos is, why does this matter now? So how do I get people to get up out of their seats to go vote in this moment or to purchase my product, which is another persuasion? That's that Kairos element. And so we're looking at why today, why right now. So the sale is ending in this moment. If you don't go do this, your house is going to catch fire. Anyone can die tomorrow. Those like get up and out of your seat and go do this thing. That's our Kairos element. It's also the sense of like the argument fits the moment. Like last year when I taught this, I talked a lot about how like the Barbie movie, like I'm not sure it would have had the success it had if it had been 5 years earlier or 5 years later. I think it piggybacking off of what was going on with Taylor Swift at the time and her Eras tour, and just the state of the country a few years after the Me Too movement, when that had kind of faded, and just the stage of feminism that was kind of occurring at the time. It had a different type of relevancy that I don't necessarily would have been as successful in different times. So the Kairos in that instance is like this moment also fits into why like this argument also fits into this moment and connects to it on a timing level. So Kairos is time. It comes into the timeliness of the piece. Okay, so we're going to put these into action and do some practice. So follow along, complete the questions as we go. I'm going to give you a presentation on why you should show up to class on time. So it's a double whammy. I get to lecture you. So we're going to be paying attention to our appeals while I'm talking and reviewing in the questions that are attached. So beginning now. why you should show up to class on time. All right, so let's address the issue. Students are arriving several minutes late daily. Missing 5 minutes of a class a day equals 25 minutes of class time a week. That's 100 minutes a month, which is a lot of minutes. When you are not here, you're missing out on important directions, review, and new lessons. And we need you here so that way you're not missing out on these pieces. We all deserve to be able to focus. It interrupts me, and it is just disrespectful of my time and your classmates' time. If you are a good student, you would take both of those elements into consideration. As your teacher, I am responsible to know what is best for you. In my 11 years of teaching experience, being in class helps you stay on track and be successful. I know some students have issues outside their control that make it a challenge, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't endeavor to make it on time daily. Now is the time to get here on time. We're halfway through the quarter, and many of you are already facing consequences of being late repeatedly. Now is the time to turn it around, or you may face discipline consequences as well. Really arriving to class on time is in your best interest and considerate of others. And that concludes the practice presentation on why you should be here on time. Let's go back to the slides, though, and talk about the different strategies being used. All right, so first, just the topic. Students are arriving several minutes late daily. This could be building our logos up as we start to kind of create these logical connections between the different ideas and the argument. Missing 5 minutes of class a day equals 25 minutes of class time a week. So numbers are going to be logos. So they are used to establish the logic of our argument. So that's logos there. Continuing that train of thought, that's 100 minutes a month, and that's a lot of minutes. So there's two things happening here. That's 100 minutes a month is very strong, logos again, but then we also have that's a lot of minutes, and there's that slight emotional tinge to that of kind of creating urgency. So we could see that as that pathos, creating that sense of urgency, that emotional tug of, oh man, 100 minutes, that is a lot, as that language is emotional. So we kind of call that the emotional language or strong language being used. You're missing out on important directions, review, and new lessons when you are late. More logos. You are missing out on important directions, review, and new lessons. These are logical examples of what the consequences are for missing this. Missing out can also have a slight pathos to it, as it has that element of you're missing out, and that it can be an emotional experience for your audience. It also interrupts me and is disrespectful of my time and your classmates' time. This could be logos, and that it's a logical fallout and consequence. This could be ethos, and that I'm making an ethical argument that you are not being a good student and respectful of your peers and your educator, that we all deserve to be able to focus, kind of comes back to that pathos that all the students in the room do have that have that like logical reason why they should deserve that time, and you have that responsibility, and that can be, emotional for audience members. As your teacher, I'm responsible to know what is best for you. So this is me establishing ethos. Why do I have any trustworthiness as to what's happening here? And so I'm establishing my ethos, my credibility by saying, I have a responsibility to do what is best for you, that I have experience that backs this up, and that I'm using that experience to help guide you, give you a better experience within the classroom. Right. I know some students have issues outside their control that make it a challenge, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't endeavor to make it on time daily. So I do think that this is one of the ones that goes two different ways, and you might not expect it. So the first, of course, is logic. There's the logic of some students have issues outside of their control, or that make it difficult for them. They're coming from way across the campus where they have band practice, and those things make it a challenge to be here on time. This is also ethos. When we address a counterclaim, when we look at opposing arguments and we say, hey, I know there's another side, which is a really strong and important thing to do in argumentation, we are saying, we are building our own credibility because we are saying, I understand there's other perspectives here. And by not ignoring them, our credibility can be, can be flawed. So we don't want that to happen. We want our credibility to be nice and strong. And so one of the ways we establish that is by looking at opposing views and ensuring that we're addressing those concerns as well. Now is the time to get here on time. This is the Kairos, and just making sure that the consequences are clear. Fear at the end, that pathos, strong fear response, that there's discipline consequences for turning up late too often. So that's there as well. So. All right, and this was just what's it, summarization, a summation of the topic. All right, so hopefully that helped to clarify some of our appeals, and some of the other strategies as well, things like repetition that occur within argumentation.